Okay, let's get started here. I'm Walter Lohman, Director of the Asian Studies Center here at the Heritage Foundation. Appreciate you all coming out to talk about Taiwan's role in international organizations. Obviously, this is a topic of ever-increasing relevance, as it seems that the Chinese are doubling down on preventing Taiwan to gain meaningful participation. You had recently the case of the World Health Assembly, where Taiwan has been denied some role after many years of participation. It's a similar case with Icao. Now they're not even invited as a guest, which had its drawbacks, but at least they were there 3-4 years ago. And now we have an issue of Taiwan's membership in Interpol, which would seem to make a great deal of sense for everyone involved, Chinese included. A couple of years ago, in fact, Congress passed a law that required State Department to come up with a report on how it was going to get Taiwan into Interpol. But despite a lot of that attention from Congress on this and other issues, the job is becoming just ever more difficult for the Chinese, for the Taiwanese. So what do we do in this case? That's what we're here to talk about today. We've got some experts here to think it through with us. What we're going to do first is have Mainland Affairs Council Deputy Minister Cheng-Yi to come up and talk to us. He's using slides, so we don't want to block his view here. He's going to come up and make his presentation. Then we'll have the rest of the panelists come up, present, and then we'll have a free-flowing Q&A. So with that, let me invite Minister Lin to come to the stage and get us started.
Good morning. I would like to express my gratitude to Walter for this arrangement, very timely arrangement, and thank you for the invitation from Heritage Foundation. And when the earthquake hit Hualien in eastern part of Taiwan, the day before yesterday, and for mainland Chinese tourists, they passed away, and 5 are still missing. So on behalf of the Mainland Affairs Council, I would like to extend my sincere condolences to those families losing their loved one, and thank generosity and assistance offered not only by Beijing, but also by many other countries, including the United States, Japan, and Beijing Chinese Red Cross Association, very kind, and they offer every possible way to assist Taiwan in recovery program. And individuals, leaders, spiritual leader, including Pope Francis and Dalai Lama, they also send their sincere condolences to Taiwan. In year 2017, last year, every day, 7,000 Chinese tourists went to Taiwan. And also in year 2017, every day, 14,000, that is the twice of the number I just mentioned, 7,000, 14,000 Taiwanese tourists and business people, they travel to mainland China. And also every day, Taiwanese people travel to Quemoy and Matsu with the number of 7,000. So civil aviation security is the utmost important for both sides of the Taiwan Strait. However, there are increasing potential risks regarding air safety in the Taiwan Strait since the very beginning of this year. As you could see from the map here, you can see the median line. We also call it debris. It's the kernel Colonel Davis back to the Eisenhower administration 60 years ago when the Colonel Davis created the center or median line between Taiwan and mainland China. And the red dot here is M503. It did not come into being until 2015. So only 3 years ago under President Xi Jinping. As you can see, it's almost parallel and quite close to each other. And 3 years ago, the M503 created by Beijing and reported to Icao after consultation with Taipei. Very intensive negotiation for 4 months. And then after that, operation is only one way, from the north to south. It's only one way. But since the very beginning of this year, the government in Beijing decided to make it two-way, and also activation of W122 between Mazhou and Fuzhou, and W123 very close to Kinmen. As you can see from this map, it's within 1 nautical mile from Kinmen terminal control area regarding the W123, and W122 about 3 nautical miles from Mazhou terminal control area. And what concerns Taipei most is that flight on the northbound M503 operate only 4 nautical miles from the median line. As you could see, we have quad-stray flight between Taiwan and mainland China. And for those tourists coming from Beijing, they are using the northern flight route here. And from the central China, they are using the flight route and then connecting to the capital of Taiwan, Taipei. And for those from Xiamen or Amoy, they need to fly to the south and then connecting the A1 to go to the city of Taipei. It's not domestic flight, it's quad-stray flight. There are no shortcuts. You can simply fly your aircraft, cutting all the shortcuts, and directly from Amoy to Taipei, from Shanghai to Taipei. There are certain kind of regulation according to the air transport agreement reached between Taipei and Beijing back to 2008. So it's not domestic flight. It needs to be negotiated. And agreement need to be signed between Taipei and Beijing. I would like to give the very concrete evidence back to the 2014. There are altogether 370 flight cases reported regarding the air pilot during the operation, the air deviation or yacht. And so it's very not unusual for the pilot in certain kind of climate, weather condition. So it's very possible for the air pilot to deviate from the regular course. So altogether, 370 cases. And the convention in civil aviation is for the airplane to yaw to the right in time of emergency. So that was the critical issue. Beijing made some compromise regarding the M503. 3 years ago, Beijing agreed to move to the west 6 nautical miles and agreed not to activate the northbound M503. But on January 4th, without prior consultation and only 40 minutes prior notification, Taipei was notified by Fuzhou and Amoy Flight Control Center regarding the activation of the W122, W123. And that is the history back to the December 2014 and March 2015. There are technical communication between the Civil Aviation Administration between Taipei and Beijing, and also political dialogue between Taipei Mainland Affairs Council and Taiwan Affairs Office in Beijing. So that is the compromise. Beijing pledged to only use the M503 for one-way southbound flight, and the W flight route could not be activated until after further negotiation and confirmation between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. And Beijing also agreed that flight on the southbound 503 will operate 6 nautical miles to the west. So, as you could see from this slide, Beijing altogether in single month of March 2015 made 2 notice to airmen and reported to the Icao, the first one in early March of 2015, and also later the month, another one, the 6 nautical miles to the west of M503. That is the concrete evidence. So people might wonder, there is a hard evidence. Even Beijing believes that there is a potential risk of air traffic close encounter in the air in the Taiwan Strait. And people might wonder why, at the very beginning of this year, what are the motivations for Beijing to take this kind of action, unilateral action? As I just mentioned, Beijing for many years tried to have the shortcut between the cities in mainland China and city in Taipei, and to strengthen the quadrilateral flight route and pave the way for direct crossing over the Taiwan Strait. And Beijing also is trying to ease traffic congestion under the growing number of flights over the Yangtze River and Pearl River Delta area. And Beijing also tried to constrain the airspace for Taiwan military aircraft training line to the right of the median line. And people might also wonder, Beijing tried to punish the Taiwan administration with an exercise of the Chinese sharp power. So Beijing argued that does not need Taipei permission to open those new flight route. And an agreement or arrangement with Taiwan is not necessary. And it needs political foundation, which means 1992 consensus to deal with the issue. And on the same day, in the same morning after Beijing put into the operation or lost new flight route, the Mainland Affairs Council, we sent our protest, not only through our unilateral one-way communication to Taiwan Affairs Office in Beijing, through fax. We also, through the public statement, we urge both sides of the Taiwan Strait to sit down to tackle the very issue. And we believe this instance is the unilateral change of status quo and might endanger regional security in the Taiwan Strait and also in the surrounding area. And also, President Tsai convened a national security meeting calling upon Beijing to take every step to diffuse concern, and also the two sides of the Taiwan Strait should move as quickly as possible to launch technical negotiation on air safety issue. And for the time constraint, I will skip some PowerPoint slide. And we believe Beijing is violating the Icao regulation requiring coordination with surrounding affected flight information region before the new flight are activated. That is the poll in Taiwan. More than 80% of the Taiwanese, they argue that Beijing should talk to Taipei and consult with Taipei over the operation of northbound M503. And then come into the episode 2. I could mention that the second episode. And in addition to public statement and fax to Taiwan Affairs Office to express our concern, Taipei, the Taiwan administration has taken a concrete response through a due process and early warning. For example, on January 18, we told China Eastern Airline that airliner is using northbound M503, and Xiamen Air, that company is using W122 and W123. The necessity to assess and review their application for additional charter flight for the Chinese Lunar New Year. And in the meantime, Mainland Affairs Council encouraged other Chinese airliner and also Taiwanese EVA Air and China Airlines to apply for additional flight for the Spring Festival. But Beijing took no action, these two companies took no action. And almost 2 weeks after, on January 30, China Eastern Airline and Xiamen Air decided to cancel 176 additional flights. And they promised to refund passengers who have already booked their ticket back to Taiwan. And we make every possible way. We responded, and we don't retaliate it. We also give every possible way for Beijing to consider to try a middle ground. And we also fully honor the the Quad-Trade Air Transport Agreement in year 2008. And also, we honor Quad-Trade Air Safety Cooperation Agreement. We believe there is a dispute, and it is necessary for Taipei and Beijing to sit down within 30 days, according to the agreement. And so, what will be the next step? We urge Beijing to take every effort to facilitate the safe return of Taisang, Taiwanese business people back to Taiwan. So the Lunar New Year is still 1 week away from today. So there is some kind of possibility for compromise between Taipei and Beijing. As you could see with this comparison, last year, 314 additional charter flight, and this year, without 176, there are still 313 was approved by Taiwan Civil Aviation Administration. And then the possible exit strategy for Taipei and in particular for Beijing to consider. Number one, to authorize non-profit organization to resume quad-trade technical talk regarding the additional flight charter flight. As I just mentioned, back to 2015, Taipei Airline Association talked to the China Air Transport Association. And the most crucial step to be taken, top priority, is to communicate with each other regarding the potential threat posed by W122 over the airspace of Matsu, and also W123 in the airspace of Quemoy, and to shift the northbound M503 flight route west by 6 nautical miles. So try to locate northbound and southbound M503 air corridor at the same and equal distance from the median line in the Taiwan Strait. That is the unilaterally Beijing could take for the next step. And Beijing need to assure and reassure Taiwan about its intention and taking action to reduce suspicion from Taiwan. It took more than 3 weeks for Taiwan Affairs Office in Beijing to specify, to give more concrete number, what are the distance between the W123 and W122 away from Matsu and Quemoy. So my final remark will be this one. Since quad-trade flight is not domestic flight, and Taiwan is not the local government or the People's Republic of China, so it's not domestic flight. It takes two to tango. It takes two to sit down to talk to each other, and technical communication are necessary, as promised by Beijing. But it's time for Beijing to take action to consolidate that promise. In consultation with the Taiwanese side, as Beijing did in 2015. And Beijing could also send a delegation team of members to Taipei, as it did in June last year. We still have all kinds of functional exchanges with each other. In June 2017, there is a delegation, high-power delegation from Chinese Civil Aviation Administration went to Taipei and meet the Taiwanese counterpart. But almost on the same day, the government of Panama decided to switch diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing, and then that delegation cut short all their trip and back to Beijing. But anyway, Taiwan and Beijing, we are more than willing to conduct dialogue anywhere Beijing prefer on every detailed issue regarding the aviation flight across the Taiwan Strait as soon as possible. So I will stop there and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me call the other panelists. Why don't you stay here? And then, so for Q&A, and I'll call the other panelists up. Mr. Green. Well, I'm glad we could get right to the substance of one of the current problems around Taiwan's lack of participation in international organizations, specifically with Icao. Were Taiwan a member or somehow a meaningful participant in Icao's proceedings, this might be something that we could avoid, and I look forward to hearing Minister Lin's views on that in particular. So I'm going to introduce our other panelists briefly. Our first panelist, the one that was coming in from Paris, is not coming. You may see that there's no tag for her, Valerie from FRS. I always tell French friends that actually there's a lot of similarities between Washington and Paris. They usually sniff at that suggestion. But one way they certainly are very much like us is that a little bit of snow shuts down the entire city. And so she was unable to get her flight out after actually making it to the airport. So she was unable to get here. We'll have her around another time because I think this issue is important to more than just the United States. It's something that we've got to get other people involved in too, the whole range of issues regarding Taiwan and its international space and all the other many issues involved in cross-straits relations. But we do have two excellent panelists here to take us through some of these issues. First, Jacques Delisle. Despite his name, he's actually not from France. He's a professor of law and political science and director of the Center for East Asian Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm sure he's well known to many of you in the audience. Jacques is also director of the Center for the Study of Contemporary China and director of the Asia program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. And he has a JD from Harvard. And then we'll turn to Ted Broman, not from Harvard, but Ted is a senior research fellow at Heritage in Anglo-American Relations, and just so happens that he's currently writing a paper on Interpol and its intricacies. So he's very, very familiar with the processes there and the oddities of its membership requirements. Before joining Heritage, Ted was 9 years as Associate Director of International Security Studies at Yale, which is why I made the point about Harvard. And they're actually sitting next to each other, which is encouraging. Ted got his PhD also from Yale. So with that, let me turn it over to Jacques to get us started, and then we'll hear from Ted, and then I hope to have a free-flowing conversation here.
Well, thank you, Walter. It's a pleasure to be here, and Heritage, of course, has such a distinguished record of working on Taiwan issues under your role, and before that, of course, John Tasic was quite prominent here, and then Harvey Feldman back in the day. So it's great to be back here. Philadelphia actually has nothing in common with Washington or Paris. We don't get shut down by snow, we get shut down by football. So actually, I had to get out of people where we're heading in. It was quite a spectacle. So my charge on this panel is to be the broad and shallow one. Others will get into more depth. And since broad and shallow is my comparative advantage, that's fine with me. So on the general issue of Taiwan's participation in international organizations, I think the way to think about it is it's partly about substance and partly about symbolism. The substance issues you heard a bit about in the airspace talk from Minister Lin, but basically there are benefits to Taiwan and the people in Taiwan, and there are benefits to the international regime in whatever subject matter space we're talking about to having Taiwan participate because Taiwan is a significant actor in many of these spaces, health, aviation, many others. The other is about symbolism and international status, and I don't say symbolism to discount it. It's really important because it is the card that Taiwan has to play in terms of seeking security in a somewhat hostile international environment. Minimally, this is avoiding marginalization, isolation, subordination to Beijing on the international stage, and that sort of thing. Maximally, it's to help Taiwan secure its status as a state, or at least state-like entity in the international system by being in organizations with entities that are mostly, and in some cases just about exclusively, accepted as states. And when Taiwan can't get membership, of course, participation is the next best thing. And short of that, as I'll say near the end of my remarks, Taiwan sometimes does this kabuki, as it were, of as-if participation, behaving the way a member state of these regimes would. This matters because of one of the weird intersections between international law and international politics. That is, what gets you to be a state under the Montevideo Convention criteria are territory, that's easy. Population, that's easy. A government that controls its own affairs, provides order at home, that's easy. Participation in international relations, where the formal side helps more than the informal side, but it's important to have both. And of course, diplomatic relations and participation in international organizations are two of the key elements of the formal side. So now to narrow the focus a little bit, we're mostly going to talk about, I suspect, rather pessimistic or negative things up here today. It's always tough for Taiwan to secure participation in international organizations and international space more generally, and it's gotten tougher, of course, given the cold shoulder that Beijing has turned toward Taiwan since Tsai Ing-wen became president, and Tsai refused to accept the 92 consensus, or Beijing's version of a one-China principle. So where is some good news? Well, Taiwan is a member of a good number of international governmental organizations, around 3 dozen, and it is an observer in many others. Taiwan is a full member of such things as the WTO, the biggest organization out there on the economic landscape, APEC, although Taiwan's president is not allowed to attend its meetings, the Asian Development Bank, and so on. And we've seen some successes even in the UN-affiliated organizations, which is the area, of course, where state membership is the gold standard and where Beijing has insisted on that construction. So we, of course, saw Taiwan participate as an observer in the WHA from 2009 through 2016. We saw at least one, well, so far only one round of being a special guest at the ICAO Assembly, and we've seen Taiwan have some degree of participation in the UNFCCC, including the COP22 meeting in Marrakesh. There are certain patterns to where Taiwan gets in and where it doesn't. They're pretty obvious ones. First, Taiwan has had a better chance of being a participant in international organizations where it was a member before Beijing began rejoining the international system. So in some sense, Taiwan has been grandfathered in, as it were, or at least not kicked out. It's been kicked out of some, but not all. Things like the ADB and APEC fit that model. Taiwan has done better in economic issue areas, not surprisingly, because that's an area where Taiwan punches above its weight. It's a hugely important actor on the international scene. And we've seen that kind of pattern extend to other non-high politics areas, if you will, where Taiwan is an important player. So not just the economy, but also international health, particularly after SARS, and international air transit and potentially maritime transit. And of course, it's easier where the organization does not have a clear rule, or a relatively clear rule, of states members only. So WTO obviously doesn't, and that's been one of the ways Taiwan has had an opportunity there. And of course, again, participation short of membership where it's available. So let me just spend a couple minutes recapping a story which I suspect is familiar to this audience about the saga of what has happened with Taiwan in UN-related international organizations in recent years. And again, these have been the tough ones because particularly of Beijing's insistence that this is a states member only club. The WHA is probably the most well-known. It's been a priority for the Tsai Ing-wen government to try to continue that membership. And of course, Taiwan did get to participate in 2016, right at the transition from the Ma government to the Tsai government. That could sort of be was in the pipeline, and formally the invitation went to the then sitting health minister, who was still in the Ma government, so that could be finessed a bit. But there were, of course, always limits. Taiwan got to participate in the WHA meetings, not to participate in the WHO, the really functional organization. It was, of course, ad hoc and annual, based on a discretionary renewal year to year. It was, of course, bound up with the rapprochement in cross-strait relations during the Ma presidency. And after 8 years of participation, it's come to an end, at least for now, with the 2017 denial of an opportunity to participate, which was foreshadowed in 2016 when it was a tougher line to allow Taiwan's participation. We saw specific references to UN General Assembly Resolution 2758 and the parallel WHO Resolution 25.1. Those are the ones expelling Taiwan, in effect, from those organizations. And of course, it's been a little tough for Taiwan in part because Margaret Chan of Hong Kong has been the head of the WHO. And so one of the other themes that runs through this is a lot of PRC, including in this case Hong Kong, nationals at the tops of these organizations. If we turn to ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, that's been another priority that the Tsai government has announced. And the hope was for a renewal of what happened in 2013, when for the first time Taiwan was allowed to participate as a special guest of the president of ICAO. Again, at the assembly, not really joining the organization in full. Well, 3 years later, didn't happen. 4 months or so into the Tsai administration, in September of 2016, Taiwan was not allowed, was not allowed to participate. And again, we see a case of China gaining more clout here with the Secretary General of Icao, the elected Secretary General, in 2015, being a PRC national. Then there's Interpol, another organization identified as a priority by the Tsai government. And here, every November, 2016 and 2017, Taiwan's efforts have been rebuffed. Taiwan was ousted from the organization in 1984. And has tried to get some form of participation. Here again, things have become even tougher, partly because of the general shift in cross-strait relations, but also because we now have Meng Hongwei, PRC Ministry of Public Security official, who is now the leadership of that organization. Then there's the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, and the Convention of Parties, the COP. In COP22, again, Marrakesh, Taiwan was allowed to participate, but in a fairly technical delegation way, people from the EPA in Taiwan, and again, not as a member, and somewhat at sufferance. Here too, I think we've seen China's clout rising a bit. China was kind of on the sidelines of climate change issues until fairly recently, but with the Obama-Xi breakthrough, the Paris Accords and so on, China, I think, gained more leverage in that space. And then, of course, there is the core UN itself, the UN General Assembly, the United Nations. Taiwan ousted from the Chinese seat, the ROC ousted from the Chinese seat in 1971. And we saw, of course, many years of trying to get some form of representation. Initiatives undertaken in the Li Denghui presidency continued under Chen Shui-bian, most famously with the 2008 referendum proposal to seek domestic support for the idea of Taiwan joining the UN under its own name. President Tsai has been quite clear that she will not pursue that particular, often frustrated agenda. All of this, of course, reflects Beijing's opposition, and sometimes it's been quite explicit. When Taiwan was denied the opportunity to participate in the 2017 WHA meetings, a spokesman for the WHA quite explicitly said, given the absence of a cross-strait understanding, Beijing is the gatekeeper, Taiwan will not be able to participate. We've seen in the ICAO and in other contexts statements from the Taiwan Affairs Office and other Beijing government official entities saying basically the precondition for Taiwan enjoying international space in the form of access to these organizations depends on an acknowledgement of the 92 consensus or the One China principle. As that suggests, much of this is not really about the international organizations themselves and what they do. It's about a general posture by Beijing on Taiwan's international space and international relations. This comes amid, of course, some shift of a few of the remaining diplomatic partners of Taiwan, now down to 20, Sao Tome and Principe, Panama. It comes amid the call on Taiwan to move its economic representative office out of the Nigerian capital and the various other measures that we all talk about. So what can Taiwan do about it, and what has Taiwan been doing about it? Well, here I think what Taiwan's been pursuing is a sensible, if only modestly and unevenly successful strategy. And Taiwan often loses, but I think this is not a 0-1 thing. That is, losing by a little bit is better than losing by a lot in these kinds of quests for entry. So what does Taiwan do? Well, one argument is that the principle of universality in these UN-related organizations is something that the system should honor, and you can't claim to be universal if 23 million people are excluded. So you see statements from Taiwan about health is a human right that everybody on the planet gets, and therefore everybody on the planet should be properly represented in the WHO. The WHO has a principle of non-discrimination in health. Here's discrimination against people in Taiwan, and that it is possibly a violation of the WHO Constitution to exclude. So these kind of playing to the universality norm. That gets you somewhere, but not all that far. The next claim is the claim that this is really important to Taiwan. It is hurting people specifically in Taiwan to be excluded. Again, in the SARS context, this health is a human right, and the costs of excluding Taiwan was a quite powerful argument. In the air traffic context, we've just heard about the safety risks to people flying to and from Taiwan. In the Interpol context, there's been a lot of emphasis on how Taiwan is a victim in some sense, as well as sometimes a location of international criminal activity. And in terms of climate change, of course, Taiwan is among the states vulnerable to typhoons and other such things. So that gets you a little bit of the ways. And there are arguments that second best participation won't do, that is mere indirect contacts and other ad hoc arrangements. So the third and somewhat more persuasive argument is that this is a risk to the international regime. If Taiwan is out of the regime can't function fully. So a WTO regime that excludes Taiwan leaves out a big chunk of international trade. A health regime that fully excludes Taiwan is a risky thing to the world and to the regime of health protection because, as Tsai Ing-wen tweeted out on the eve of the 2017 decision about WHA participation, health issues do not stop at the border, and Taiwan plays an important role in the global health system and the disease prevention system. And we see lots of other statements in that vein, including from the government at that time that the 2017 participation was denied. ICAO, similar set of arguments. We heard them from my old friend Cheng-Yi here about what happens if you don't have proper safety controls and proper governance over the airspace. And even in climate change, we see Taiwan making pointed statements about disaster relief, which often is in the context of climate change-related disasters, or in the context of Taiwan leaders, including Tsai, visiting the diplomatic allies in Oceania, some of which are about to disappear under rising sea levels, and making that kind of argument as well. Fourth on this list of things Taiwan does and can argue is to play the values card. I poo-pooed a moment ago the success in invoking the notion of these are universal organizations, but where I think Taiwan does better is to say Taiwan plays by the rules, and sometimes implicitly and sometimes explicitly argues that Beijing doesn't play by the rules, and so the kind of normative contrast gets some leverage. So in WHO context, the reason that's the big success story is SARS. Beijing handled that very badly. That's what got international support for Taiwan getting into the meetings in the first place, and that's continued to be a line of argument. In ICAO, the claim you just heard, the argument you just heard about how what Beijing is doing at least raises questions about conformity with consultation requirements in ICAO processes. And in Interpol, of course, the pointing out that Beijing has succeeded in getting some Taiwan residents extradited back to the mainland rather than to Taiwan. Complaints about red notices in Interpol, which I'm sure you'll talk about, and just the sort of ill odor of trying to get certain Chinese in exile, I guess would be the term, some rich Chinese who they're trying to get the U.S. and others to render back, including Guo Wengui and many others. And on the climate change issue, again, Taiwan has stressed its greenness, its willingness to do and its interest in doing green energy cooperation, again, climate-related humanitarian relief efforts, and a contrast with Beijing, which until the Paris Accords and until the US opted out was sort of in a difficult position by being such a big polluter in ways that affected its neighbors and in arguing strongly for common but differentiated responsibilities, which lowered the burden on developing countries like China. You know, in a sense, therefore, China's bullying helps Taiwan a little bit, although it's not nearly as helpful as China's cooperation, or at least tolerance, would be. So let me just close with one or two other short things here. So where Taiwan can't make those arguments successfully for either membership or participation, what Taiwan retreats to is as-if participation, behavior that would conform to obligations and would exercise some of the rights that would attend full membership in these organizations. So we see Taiwan saying it would adhere and follow the Montreal Protocol, which is a climate or sort of environment-related issue. But the most prominent one here is the human rights covenants. The ICCPR for civil and political rights, the ICESCR for economic, social, and cultural rights. And here, under the Ma years, with roots in the Chen years, Taiwan ratified, sought to join the two covenants. Of course, the UN didn't accept that, but Taiwan has proceeded to behave as if it were a member. So Taiwan does what countries do when they go through the Universal Periodic Review. They do self-reports, they invite in experts. All of this has Taiwan acting, walking, talking as if it were a member of the regime. That sort of helps do some of the things that I've been talking about in my remarks here. So to conclude here, before I run too far over my time, Taiwan's playing a weak hand, but playing it pretty well. Soft power is better than no power. As if is better than not being as if. Participation is better than just acting in parallel, and membership would be better still, and across different organizations, Taiwan does all of these things. And as I said at the beginning, this isn't 0 or 1, this isn't on-off. Although Taiwan has not achieved great success in these areas, largely due to Beijing's opposition, nonetheless, it has helped Taiwan's standing. You get legislation about how the US is supposed to support and report on ICAO membership, you get the US strongly supporting WHA membership and so on. And you get international experts showing up to talk about Taiwan's human rights accomplishments as part of this reporting process. So in all this, there's a lot to be said for the strategy, but I'll close on a slightly down note in that this is made more challenging in an environment where China is being more assertive in international relations generally, and particularly toward cross-strait issues, and in a moment where the US role is more uncertain and more unsettled and less clearly supportive in many ways of engagement on some of these issues than it has been.
Thank you. Jacques. Ted.
Great, thank you very much. I think you succeeded in being broad, but I don't think you succeeded in being shallow. So thank you very much for those remarks. I am definitely going to be narrow and deep. I'm going to focus on Interpol. Jacques has pointed out that Taiwan was a member of Interpol. It was a member of Interpol from 1964 to 1984, when it was expelled and replaced by the People's Republic of China. I should just pause for a second here and explain that Interpol, contrary to what you may have learned from Hollywood or journalistic reporting, is not actually an international police agency. It doesn't run around the world arresting people. There are no Interpol agents out there with guns. All of this is Hollywood fantasy. If you want sort of a quick summary of the way Interpol actually works, Interpol is maybe best conceived of as kind of a bulletin board where police agencies around the world can post wanted notices and other police agencies in other countries can look at them. Interpol does a few more things than that, but that's really the gist of what Interpol actually does. Now, what's U.S. policy on Taiwan's membership of Interpol? Well, U.S. policy, in fact U.S. law, is that Taiwan should have observer status in Interpol. This stems ultimately from the U.S.'s 1994 Taiwan Policy Review, when the U.S. declared its intention to support Taiwan's participation in appropriate international organizations. In March 2016, President Obama signed into law, quote, a bill to direct the Secretary of State to develop a strategy to obtain observer status for Taiwan in the International Criminal Police Organization. The International Criminal Police Organization is the technical real name for Interpol. The bill also requires the U.S. National Central Bureau, the NCB, that's the branch of the U.S. government that corresponds direct with Interpol headquarters, to, quote, officially request observer status for Taiwan in Interpol and to actively urge Interpol member states to support such observer status and participation for Taiwan. Well, that all sounds very good. How has it gone in practice? Well, there are a couple of difficulties. First, Article 6 of Interpol's Rules of Procedure allow police bodies that aren't members of Interpol to attend meetings of Interpol's General Assembly. The Interpol General Assembly is Interpol's supreme body. There is no equivalent of a Interpol Security Council, as there would be at the United Nations. What is less clear is whether or not Interpol's constitution actually allows observer membership at all. The March 2016 Act rests on the assertion that Interpol's constitution allows observer membership, but I'm not persuaded that it actually does. Regardless of this fact, I see no evidence that the March 2016 Act has made any genuine change in U.S. policy at all. The State Department was supposed to submit a report on its strategy for securing Taiwan's observer status by mid-June 2016. It does not appear to have submitted this report. A State Department briefing in November 2016, almost 8 months after this obligation was imposed on the Secretary of State, limited itself to only the vaguest generalities in terms of support for a Taiwanese role in Interpol, so there was little, if any, real change or even hope there. The U.S. National Central Bureau appears to have made little, if any, effort to advance Taiwan's cause. At the last meeting of the Interpol General Assembly, the U.S. focused, spectacularly unsuccessfully, on keeping the Palestinian Authority out of Interpol and getting Kosovo in. The net result of that meeting was that the Palestinians got in and Kosovo didn't get in. So U.S. strategy was a bit of a failure there. The law is there, the policy is real, but the results on the U.S. side have been, at best, I would say, paltry. What are the causes of this failure? Well, there's several. Let me run through them. First, the March 2016 Act imposes most of its requirements on the State Department, but the State Department has very little, if anything, to do with U.S. relations with Interpol. The Act also imposes a few requirements on the U.S. National Central Bureau, the NCB, but the NCB is staffed and led by the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security, and by and large, they are policemen, not diplomats. So it's not clear that the Act actually directed the appropriate parts of the U.S. government to act in suitable ways, or that the parts that the Act did direct to act are capable of taking on the kind of diplomatic roles that are actually required. And then there is the fact, as I alluded to earlier, that the March 2016 Act calls for an observer status in Interpol that does not clearly exist according to Interpol's own constitution. That's another problem. Second, the 2017 meeting of Interpol's General Assembly happened to be held in Beijing. Enough said. More seriously, as Jacques has pointed out, the current president of Interpol is Meng Hongwei, a former top Chinese security official, if there is such a thing as a former top Chinese security official. There is no chance that Taiwan is going to gain any status in Interpol as long as it is run by the PRC. And this leads on to the third and broader point. U.S. and Western influence more broadly in Interpol is on the wane and has been on the wane for a number of years. So the ability of the U.S. and Western allies in general to secure things it wants in Interpol, including but not limited to Taiwanese participation, is on the decline. I will leave the often Talmudic interpretation of the U.S.'s one China policy to others on the panel and the audience who know a lot more about it than I do. But by Interpol's own standards, there is no doubt whatsoever that Taiwan deserves not merely observer status, but member status. It so happens that in September 2017, Interpol for the first time set out its membership criteria explicitly and in reasonable detail. Here they are, and you will have heard these already from Jacques. The requesting nation should, quote, explain that it meets the conditions for statehood: a territory, a population, a government, and capacity to enter into relations with other states. An important element is also that the requesting country mentions if it is a member of other intergovernmental organizations, and in particular, if the country is a member of the United Nations or an observer state recognized by the United Nations. The only other requirements Interpol sets for membership are various commitments to abide by Interpol's rules and the nomination of an official police body with suitable competence, jurisdiction, authority, and resources. Now, Taiwan is, of course, not a member of the United Nations, but it is a member of other intergovernmental organizations, such as the WTO. It certainly has a territory, a population, a government, and the capacity to enter into relations with other states. In short, If the corrupt, officially terrorist-supporting Palestinian Authority, which, by the way, has a serious, if not an existential, ongoing dispute with Interpol member Israel, is fit to be a member of Interpol, there is no doubt that Taiwan is vastly more fit than the Palestinian Authority to be a member of Interpol, and yet the Palestinian Authority is in, and Taiwan is out. Now, of course, this is not really about fitness. This is about politics. Admission to Interpol is open to states, and China does not want Taiwan acknowledged as a state, or even given the much less significant status as an observer at meetings of the Interpol General Assembly, which is a possibility under Interpol's rules. But nonetheless, fitness does matter. Just as we would not appoint an unrepentant bank robber to oversee security at Fort Knox, the U.S. should not encourage international organizations to admit entities like the Palestinian Authority that are incapable of or demonstrably unwilling to live up to the requirements of membership in that organization. And by contrast, the U.S. should support membership for entities like Taiwan that are demonstrably willing to and capable of upholding the requirements for membership in international organizations. In fact, I would go further than this. I would say that if any nation involved in this dispute is not fit to be a member of Interpol, it is the People's Republic of China. Over the past several years, the PRC has embarked on a campaign against corruption, a notoriously politicized offense, which is often employed in efforts to abuse Interpol, because a charge of corruption, unlike, for example, murder, is very hard to disprove. Just to expand on that for a moment, if a nation charges someone with murder, there is usually a body. If a nation charges someone with corruption, the evidence, such as it is, may be merely the presence of ones and zeros in the wrong bank account. It's very hard to fake a body, but it's very easy to fake the presence of ones and zeros in the wrong bank account. Today, the People's Republic of China is widely viewed as one of Interpol's most abusive members. In other words, it is violating the requirement in Interpol's constitution, which it is pledged to uphold, that Interpol only be used to pursue ordinary common law criminals, not political criminals. There are also credible reports that the PRC seeks to compel individuals sought through Interpol to return to China more or less willingly by harassing their families inside the People's Republic of China. In short, if Interpol were to apply its own rules fairly without bias, Taiwan would be a member, and the People's Republic of China would very likely be suspended, if not expelled, from Interpol. I acknowledge, of course, that this is most unlikely to happen. It is certainly not going to happen as long as Interpol is headed by the Chinese secret police. But nonetheless, it is important for the United States to keep on emphasizing the facts. And the facts are that Taiwan is fit for Interpol membership, and the United States should uphold its own law, which is that at a minimum, Taiwan should be accorded a place as an observer at the next and all subsequent meetings of the Interpol General Assembly. Let me, along that line, make one further closing practical suggestion. I believe that the right goal is full Taiwanese membership in Interpol, and that Taiwan is entirely fit for such a status. But the alternatives are not limited to full membership, observer status in the Interpol General Assembly, or nothing at all. If the United States wants to secure something like observer status for Taiwan, there is a way to do it. Interpol has developed a range of cooperation agreements with entities and organizations, such as the Council of Europe, the Commonwealth, the Organization of American States, and the International Criminal Court. It has also developed cooperation arrangements with a wide variety of national-level institutions, such as the FBI, the Netherlands Forensic Institute, and, of course, the vitally important University of Southern Mississippi National Center for Spectator Sports Safety and Security. In other words, the forms of cooperation are very varied. The kind of entities that Interpol cooperates with formally are very varied, and they do include national-level entities. These cooperation agreements can and do include information exchange and direct or indirect access to Interpol-held databases. In other words, there is really no reason whatsoever why Interpol could not develop a cooperation agreement with Taiwanese police authorities. That's entirely within Interpol's rules, and it would, practically speaking, be the same as membership in all the functional, the real parts of Interpol, as far as Taiwan was concerned. So why should Interpol and Taiwan not include a cooperation agreement between Taiwanese police authorities in the same way that Interpol has done with, for example, the FBI? Now, again, as long as the PRC leads Interpol's executive committee, such an agreement is unlikely to happen. But this simply goes to show that the reason why Taiwan doesn't have a formal place in Interpol owes nothing to Taiwan's fitness or the fact, in theory, that there is no way for Taiwan to play such a role. Of course there is a way for Taiwan to play such a role. The problem is not Taiwan. The problem is not Interpol or Interpol's structures or its requirements for membership or its forms of cooperation. The problem is quite simple. The problem is the People's Republic of China. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ted. That was terrific. It's, it's really good to have someone speak on these issues who is not versed in the catechism of the One China policy, because you bring sort of a common sense perspective to it that most of us have lost sight of.
I'm very sorry for that, Walter.
No, that's,
try to do
all
better
right,
next time.
it makes so much. It makes so much sense. I want to open up to questions, and so while you think about what those may be, I had a couple myself. I'll ask at least one of them here. I think maybe building on that theme that I just suggested is that I think this is what makes each country's one China policy so important, and why it's not just a matter of words. Because when you have these situations like what's happening with the Vatican right now, or what happened with Marriott a few weeks ago, or any country sort of paying its traditional respect to usually China's one China principle without very much nuance, it creates the atmosphere for these sorts of things to keep Taiwan out. So when Taiwan makes the case about, when the Chinese make the case that M503 is a domestic route, that this is all a domestic issue between Taiwan, which is a part of China, the groundwork is already laid. So you don't get the kind of response you should get from the international community because they've already signed off onto this idea that Taiwan is somehow a domestic matter for the Chinese. So the words do matter. It does matter how we formulate this policy, and the United States formulates it in the most expansive way, but so many of our partners don't, and they're not very careful about how they express it, and that to say the least, that's the case with private companies like Marriott or Mercedes or any of these groups who say whatever the Chinese need them to say. But I wanted to ask Minister Lin just sort of a practical question here, stepping away a little bit from the immediate issue with the flights, the cross-strait flights. But how much interaction does Taiwan have currently, just on a working level, on a functional basis, with any of these organizations we're talking about, Icao or Interpol or any of them? How much are there practical things that go on behind the scenes despite the lack of formal structures? Are there practical things going on that we are not fully aware of?
Regarding the functional issue cooperation between Taipei and Beijing, on illegal activities, and also that is related to Interpol.
Right.
And also regarding the Icao, we have the air transport agreement. We have the flight security cooperation. So Beijing tried to to give Taiwan a special place under Beijing One China principle. In the meantime, try to exclude Taiwan from participating in the multilateral Icao, Interpol, WHO activities. But that is not the way Taiwan would like to see.
Right.
So we have altogether during 2008 to 2016, altogether we have 23 quad-trade agreements. And most of them are related to communication, aviation, and also financial economic cooperation. Beijing and Taipei, in public statement, we all honor to implement that arrangement and agreement, but in practice, Beijing try to delay it, and sometimes try to postpone all kind of interaction with Taiwan. But technical communication are still going on. For example, the Chinese counterpart talked to the Taiwanese Civil Aviation Administration through the telephone, through the fax, and only political dialogue has been suspended between Mainland Affairs Council and Taiwan Affairs Office in Beijing.
And sorry, in case I didn't understand it, there's also a similar kind of interaction with Interpol or with Icao also? Sort of an unofficial, below the radar, working level contact, or no?
The senior police leader from Taipei and Beijing, Hong Kong and Macau, they conduct annual meeting. And Beijing, very sophisticated, and set the date, on the date of the Interpol meeting back to Indonesia and Beijing. So the senior police administration official, they did meet with each other. And the health military personnel, they talk to each other regarding the food safety and security issue. But that is the special arrangement from Beijing for the consideration of the people in Taiwan. But it's not the way. It only satisfies only one part of Taiwan participation.
Okay, good. Did you have anything to add to this, Jack?
Not particularly, except just to say that there's always a bit of a double-edged quality to functional engagement with the organization. So where Taiwan has been successful, as in getting a technical delegation on environmental issues to go to COP22 in Marrakesh, or where Taiwanese health officials have been allowed to engage with the WHO on a limited level. Those things are great from the substantive perspective. That is, you get international cooperation and Taiwan offering what it has to offer and getting the benefits to some degree of engagement with those institutions. And I certainly wouldn't want to say that's a bad idea, obviously it's a great idea. But it's a little double-edged in terms of the impact on Taiwan's sort of status and security issues, because it gives a little bit of credence to Beijing's claim that, oh, everything's okay anyway. That is, without more formal participation, the substantive issues can be handled, and that then allows Beijing to say, so Taiwan is really in this game for the symbolic status things, and the world shouldn't sacrifice relations with China or stability to that end. So I think there's always a little trickiness to doing that. Again, one wouldn't want to say don't do it, because it has payoffs on the status front and has important payoffs on the substantive front, but it does create some problems.
Similar for the cross-straits cooperation. Similar dynamic.
I have been told that on occasion, Taiwan has been able to access Interpol in a rather one-way kind of direction, that is, submitting requests for information in Interpol databases by going through the PRC's NCB, which, to my mind, I mean, I guess there are some small advantages in being able to do this, but to me, the overwhelming fact is that it amounts if these reports are accurate, and these are simply statements I've had from U.S. officials, it amounts to conceding that the PRC's NCB is the NCB for China and Taiwan, which is not a concession that I would care to make.
Right, yeah, and again, that gets back to the point about cross-straits relations. Whenever you have this technical cooperation with the PRC, you're doing it at the sufferance of China and at their goodwill. And you do create the impression that you're just another province of China and they're working with you just like they would any other part of China. Yeah. So, let me open it up to questions if I could. Any?
May I just
respond
to your question? In time of emergencies, we do need information, and that information is not given from Beijing a very timely manner. So we highly depend upon the other country, such as United States, Canada, Japan, or even Germany, who are giving Taiwan the timely information or intelligence regarding the illegal activity going on surrounding Taiwan, or international health regulation, or even COSHA. COSHA is the Common Offset and Reduction Scheme in international aviation. So we need to create some kind of level of cooperation with the other country to sustain Taiwan participation. Otherwise, Taiwan can only have one exit. That is at the mercy of Beijing and giving Taiwan some kind of information under the One China principle.
Good. Thank you. Questions? Nadia, right here in the center, with the beautiful red blouse.
Nadia Chao, Washington correspondent for Liberty Times. Good morning. My question for Dr. Ling is that earlier you mentioned the concern from the Taiwanese government about the new route, but for most countries, they may not quite understand the impact on the region. You know, they just see this as a cross-strait dispute. Could you maybe elaborate more? You know, why people in this area have to pay attention, or the U.S. should pay attention to this issue? And for Dr. Broman, we understand that you just, if I understand correctly, just mentioned the U.S. and the West influence in the Interpol is actually winning. Actually, we saw that not only in Interpol, but WHO, you know, Icao, China actually shares a quite significant, sometimes outweigh maybe to its contribution to the organization. I wonder why that U.S. retreating from the world stage. Why all these organizations are now dominated by Chinese influence? Thank you.
I think the practical impact of lack of coordination. Yeah.
Regarding the international response to M503, the southbound has been there, has been effective for 3 years. And the airliner from Southeast Asia, they are using the M503 from the north to the south. But they are not willing to take the risk since January 4th. So only Chinese airliner and also Caset, Dragon, and Hong Kong Air, only 4 airliner companies are using northbound M503. The reason why on January 4th, that was the date when the North and South Korea, they conduct negotiation. A huge North Korean delegation went to South Korea and regarding how to diffuse the tension in the Korean Peninsula. But anyway, as I just mentioned, the northbound is only 4 nautical miles away from the median line or the Taiwan Strait. So it's very possible for pilot to yacht to the right and cross the median line and intruded the airspace reserved for Taiwanese air force. So there is a potential risk. But the other airliner from Southeast Asia, they do pay attention. So they avoid to use the northbound connecting the Southeast Asia to Northeast Asia.
So it is an international route. I mean, regardless of what the Chinese say, it is treated as an international route.
Only one way,
Right.
north to the south. That was reported to Icao after consultation with Taipei. So we don't have any argument. We aim 503 southbound.
But northbound, the Chinese have declared it's a domestic route. But it sounds like it would be treated as.
The Chinese government argue that it's the international air corridor agreed by the Icao, but it's not the case.
Yeah, the reason why I just sort of persist on that point is that if it's an international route, then the U.S. military can fly that route as well, right? If it's an international route, if it's a domestic route, then no, but I don't know, something worth exploring, I think. But I think the military implications of it are very important because one thing it does do is cut down the warning time for Taiwan, because you can't necessarily rely on knowing whether there are military flights engaged in that route and it's close to the median line. It could turn very easily, give Taiwan much less warning time. Ted, do you want to reply to your question?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question and probably not one that I can really respond to fully because there are a lot of factors here. Obviously, the background is China's economic growth. Let's sort of take that sort of the larger context as read. I wouldn't say that Interpol is dominated by China or Russia. It is led by a Chinese security official. At some point in the future, when his term expires, he will be replaced by an official from another country. But right now, China is clearly in a very important position. Numerically, budgetarily, the Western democracies are still overwhelmingly predominant in Interpol. Of Interpol's 15 largest funders, 14 are Western or Western-affiliated democracies. China provides only about $1 million a year in financial support to Interpol. Approximately 75% of Interpol's funding derives from those 14 Western-aligned democracies at the very top. The Democratic share will be even larger if you went further down the spectrum of contributors. The problem really is that the United States, and for that matter, a lot of other democracies, treat Interpol as what it actually is. Interpol is supposed to be a non-political, technical association of criminal police organizations. If you take a look at the way the U.S. staffs its relations with Interpol, it is run by the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. Cops, for lack of a better word. Good cops, too. Very, very good cops, but they are policemen. They're not diplomats. The whole U.S. approach to so many of these international organizations, Interpol is just an example, are to treat them as serious technical efforts to address problems in international affairs. China and Russia and Iran and a number of other countries treat these organizations as first and foremost political and then secondarily as technical or functional. And the problem is not that the United States is retreating. The problem is not that the United States has changed its policy in some way. On the contrary, the problem is the United States has not changed its policy. We have not been willing to recognize that our good intentions and the good intentions of our democratic allies in treating these organizations as technical, apolitical exercises in international cooperation is being manipulated and abused by countries who treat them first and foremost as political entities. So therefore, the answer for the United States is really quite simple. Step up and recognize that there is a political game going on in these organizations, and that in order to fight the politicization of these organizations, you have to be willing to call it out for what it is and to appoint individuals to U.S. leadership positions inside the U.S. government who are willing to fight to keep these organizations technical and apolitical by recognizing that other people want to treat them as political. That's the core problem. It's not that we've changed or we're retreating or that Interpol's rules have fundamentally changed. It's that the other participants in these organizations are politicizing them, and we have been, frankly, too nice, too kind, and too secure in our belief that everyone really wants to cooperate with us in the same way that we want to cooperate with them to push back as we should have done.
I think it depends a little bit on what organization and what kind of regime space you're looking at. So for a bunch of these areas, it's the consequence of the UN principle of one country, one vote, right? And that creates a certain alignment. If you count noses among countries, that's not always in line with where the US preferences are. So that's just numbers, and as China's influence over various other countries grows, it reinforces that nose counting dynamic. Some of it is obviously power matters, whether it's economic power or hard power, and China's been growing relative to the US in that area. That's why we have a G20 and not a G7 or a G8. I don't have a G2, but you know, and we see that happening in the WTO as well. Some of it is, in some areas, China has a credible exit option and is starting to develop that. So you see something like the AIIB, which is so far a pretty status quo organization, but it's a platform which could be used to challenge a World Bank-centered development support regime. So too with regional trade agreements outside the WTO. The TPP was going to be one of them, still maybe without the US. The RCEP clearly is. They're nested in the WTO, but they undercut the role of that organization. And finally, some of it is the US hasn't joined some of these things. The most obvious example is UNCLOS. And the U.S. can argue till it is blue water in the face about how everything in UNCLOS that matters is customary international law, but boy, is it a great talking point to say, you guys haven't joined it. And we see that, and if you cast doubt on whether the U.S. is in the WTO for the long haul, that raises those kinds of concerns. So whatever view on the merits of whether the U.S. should be in these things or not, within the organizations, within the conventions, it's costly not to be a member.
Yeah.
Maybe I should mention that regarding Nadia's concern, we appreciate not only United States, but also Japan and European Parliament in their demarcation to Beijing, demarche Beijing, try to set a very clear concern. And all those government or other very important international community members, they argue that issues related to civil aviation and safety in the Taiwan Strait should be decided through dialogue between both sides of the Taiwan Strait. So only through constructive dialogue could this kind of issue be settled and tension could be diffused.
Well, I think we have to leave it there. It's a very enlightening conversation. Thanks for coming, Mr. Minister, and please join me in thanking our guests for